Hey, Ryan Reynolds here for Mint Mobile. You know, one of the perks about having 4 kids that you know about is actually getting a direct line to the big man up north. And this year, he wants you to know the best gift that you can give someone is the gift of Mint Mobile's unlimited wireless for $15 a month. Now, you don't even need to wrap it. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
Stand clear of the closing doors, please.
Stuck on your commute again? Bad Wi-Fi? No signal? Nothing to do? Time to make your ride a lot more fun with Royal Kingdom. It's a puzzle game that's relaxing, challenging, and works perfectly offline. With no ads and amazing graphics, every level feels fresh and satisfying. Each round only takes a few minutes, ideal for a daily commute or wherever you have a little bit of time. So download Royal Kingdom now on Google Play or App Store.
Hi there, and welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. And this is the third, well, it was going to be the third part of our kind of review of the year. We looked at Trump's America, we looked at European crisis, and so it obviously makes sense to look at Asia. Though obviously, you know, you can't really lump in such an enormously diverse part of the world, such a huge part of the world, into one convenient category. And anyway, so I'd had a whole thing prepared looking at India and Pakistan, and Bangladesh, and Southeast Asia, and, you know, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, looking at China and Taiwan and Korea. It was going to be very, very long, and Japan. And then I came across a post from a Chinese foreign policy analyst about China and India. And it seemed to incorporate a huge amount of what I was going to say. Now, I practice humility at all times, or the best of times anyway. And I'm very much a kind of why you have silver when you can have gold. The analysis I found is actually far more interesting than anything I was going to talk about. But it covers a lot of the same topic areas, fortunately. And it saves me a significant amount of labour and hassle. So there is in the Beijing Cultural Review, an article titled "Favourite Child to Abandon Porn: The Shift in Trump's India Policy During His Second Term" by an analyst called Mao Keji. And this is really captures where India is at the moment, and also it explores kind of America's mentality in Asia and China's game too. India has often had an under kind of explored sort of history in the kind of the gap between America and China. The strategic pivot during the Bangladesh War of Independence by Indira Gandhi towards a more sympathetic relationship, even a strategic alliance with the Soviet Union, is a key example of that. I mean, that's a kind of a slightly story for another time. But India, I mean, India in the kind of the imaginations of Western foreign policy thinkers in the 1990s and the 2000s was, well, will India kind of become China Mark II? Will its workforce will it industrialize in the same way? Will it have a similar sort of role in the world economy? And India, that's obviously not how Indian foreign policy operatives and policymakers see themselves, see India. So in the podcast notes, I'll put a link to the article because it's well worth a read. But here is what Mao Keji has to say. So he writes, over the past 2 decades, India and the United States have been widely regarded as natural strategic partners. Geostrategically, both have identified China as a common competitor, while India, seen as a high potential asset, has benefited from comprehensive American support across defense and security, trade and the economy, and science and technology, becoming a clear strategic favorite. Yet with the advent of Trump's second term, US-India relations have taken a sharp downturn. India has emerged as one of the countries most severely affected in practice by Trump's tariff war, while also facing repeated policy provocations and dismissive rhetoric from Washington, effectively relegating it to the status of a strategic discard. This abrupt shift in US policy towards India has attracted widespread attention. Some attribute it to Trump's personal temperament and governing style. Others to the Modi government's inadequate handling of the Trump administration. Still others argue that the real cause lies in the Trump administration's missteps and vacillation in its China policy. While these explanations each capture certain facets of the trajectory of US-India relations, none can simultaneously account for the broader commonalities in Trump's recent alliance policy and the particular abruptness of the deterioration in US-India ties. This article argues that the Trump administration's concern over the decline of America's power, rather than its concern over external geopolitical threats, constitutes the fundamental cause of the sharp transformation in US-India relations. First, it is precisely this anxiety over decline that has led to the Trump administration to adopt a more cautious posture towards traditional geopolitical rivals such as China and Russia. Beyond rhetorical intimidation, Washington has often acted with notable restraint, wary of being drawn into a new round of geopolitical confrontation that would deplete scarce strategic resources and thereby accelerate America's own decline. Second, as the Trump administration's willingness to confront traditional geopolitical adversaries has markedly diminished, US expectations of its allies and partners, including the European Union, India, and Japan, have shifted accordingly. They are no longer viewed as primarily as pieces on a chessboard for encircling America's enemies, but increasingly as blood bags to relieve pressure and prolong America's survival. As a result, the starting point of US alliance policy, has turned decisively towards the question of how much direct and immediate benefit partners can deliver to the United States. Third, although India has long benefited from American support offered largely without demanding returns, it lacks the industrial and economic foundations that enable Japan, South Korea, and Europe to make material concessions and signal loyalty to Washington. Nor is India willing to fall fully into line behind the United States, as they have done. Instead, it has vacillated on issues such as sanctions on Russia and the BRICS framework, prompting the Trump administration to regard India as a target requiring forceful pressure and disciplinary coercion. So, there's a lot to unpack there, but I think the vacillation, which I think is perhaps a word that the Trump administration would use, I don't know necessarily whether you can call it sort of vacillation as kind of, indecision and inability to make strategic choices. It sometimes it can merely be that the strategic choice is to remain open-minded about one's allegiances. But the refusal by India to reject the BRICS grouping and to place sanctions on Russia, India is hugely reliant on cheap Russian energy. Simple as that. India has a need to access cheap Russian energy, and Russia was in at the beginning of the Ukraine crisis desperate to find international markets for that energy. So it's a big ask by the Biden administration for India to forego that in pursuance of American strategic interests. Of course, what America was able to do during the whole crisis, particularly with Europe, is replace Russian gas with American fuel, American energy, which has turned out to be significantly more expensive. And Trump, no doubt, saw this as an opportunity to replace Russia as a key energy provider for much of the world, never missing an opportunity to profit. So India first has perhaps not quite been able to, because of its its relatively lower levels of industrialization. There are fewer concessions that it can make as far as bending the knee to Washington goes. So it's been able to do less and kind of be kind of less sort of performatively servile in the way that Trump would like. Anyway, Mao Keji writes, the shift in the Trump administration's strategic focus not only helps explain the common patterns evident in its alliance policy, but also for the distinctive features of its changing policy towards India. Driven by concerns over its decline, the United States is no longer willing to commit additional resources to supporting India, particularly a still rapidly rising India. As the gap in national power between the two countries continues to narrow, Washington has in fact grown more wary of and resistant to India. India's self-congratulatory discourse regarding its own strength and status, its service sector-dominated economic structure that closely resembles that of the United States, and the high visibility of Indian diaspora in Western societies, have all, objectively speaking, intensified American perceptions of India as an overall threat. As a result, India has become a focal target of Western right-wing populist movements. The provocative actions and disparaging rhetoric directed at India by Trump himself and his figures close to him reflect a broader and increasingly negative perception of India within American and indeed wider Western society. It is interesting to note how much of the kind of contemporary online racism, xenophobia, and the kind of the Trumpist discourse around China, around India, or pick your favorite country, comes from this kind of place of acute anxiety about the fragility of Western economic and strategic power. Provocative actions and disparaging rhetoric directed at India by Trump himself and figures close to him reflect a broader and increasingly negative perception of India within American and indeed wider Western society. Viewed from this perspective, so long as the United States remains preoccupied with anxiety over its declining relative position in the global order, it will sooner or later be compelled to reckon with competition from India, not least because a future battle for second place between the two countries over comprehensive national power and aggregate economic size cannot be ruled out. Looking ahead, America's relative decline, alongside India's rise and a dominant China, might even allow Beijing's structural tensions with Washington and New Delhi to mutually unwind, triggering a fundamental geopolitical realignment in China's favor. So, what this is indicating, what Mao Keji is arguing here, is that you may well find that it is evident that the battle for geopolitical and strategic dominance and economic dominance is over, and that for perhaps the rest of the 21st century, that one has been decided. I was about to tag on there before the robots take over, but maybe that one's not as far away as we think. That China will, for the foreseeable future, be the world's dominant economic and strategic power, and the battle now is really for who will be in second place, and it might not be America. It may be, but it might not be.
When you think about meal kit companies, what do you see? Probably long, complicated recipes and subscriptions you can't escape. But with the new Blue Apron, we're doing meal delivery differently. No subscription needed. Faster, easier meals. And the same dedication to quality we've always had. Shop 100+ meals at blueapron.com. Get 50% off your first 2 orders with code APRON50. Terms and conditions apply. Visit blueapron.com/terms for more.
Hey, Ryan Reynolds here for Mint Mobile. One of the perks about having 4 kids that you know about is actually getting a direct line to the big man up north. And this year, he wants you to know the best gift that you can give someone is the gift of Mint Mobile's unlimited wireless for $15 a month. Now, you don't even need to wrap it. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
Stand clear of the closing doors, please.
Stuck on your commute again? Bad Wi-Fi? No signal? Nothing to do? Time to make your ride a lot more fun with Royal Kingdom. It's a puzzle game that's relaxing, challenging, and works perfectly offline. With no ads and amazing graphics, every level feels fresh and satisfying. Each round only takes a few minutes, ideal for a daily commute or wherever you have a little bit of time. So download Royal Kingdom now on Google Play or App Store.
Since the 1990s, the US has placed great expectations on India, viewing it as a future superpower on account of its vast population, pivotal geostrategic location, and favourable development trajectory. By virtually every measure, India appeared destined for great power status. More importantly, as the world's most populous democracy, India was seen both ideologically and geostrategically as fully qualified to rank among America's key partners, capable of counterbalancing authoritarian challenges. On the basis of these expectations, successive US administrations since George W. Bush's first term have converged on a broadly consistent approach to engaging India. Former US Ambassador to India Robert D. Blackwell and former National Security Council official Ashley J. Tellis encapsulated this approach as strategic altruism, which for more than 2 decades has served the overarching guiding principle anchoring US policy towards India. US strategic altruism towards India rested on the core assumption that India's rise economically, militarily, and diplomatically would in all respects serve American interests. A stronger and more prosperous India would not only meet the profit expectations of US capital, but would also, by virtue of its growing weight in Asia, crowd out, balance, and constrain a rapidly rising China, thereby becoming a democratic lock, checking an authoritarian China. This assumption was further extrapolated to suggest that the long-term strategic dividends generated by India's rise would necessarily outweigh the short-term costs borne by the United States. On this logic, even if India did not deliver immediate returns, Washington should continue to invest in, support, and tolerate India over time. America's generosity, however, was by no means a matter of pure benevolence or charity. It was a conscious course of action grounded in strategic calculation. When considering support for India, US leaders did not ask, what can India do for the United States, but rather, what can India do for itself? So long as India continued to advance towards economic prosperity and military strength, it would reinforce the balance of power favourable to freedom, a consideration that became ever more salient as China's influence expanded. According to US foreign policy decision makers, accordingly, US foreign policy decision makers judged long-term strategic convergence between the United States and India to be paramount, while short to medium-term frictions were of secondary importance. As long as India sustained its own momentum of development, Washington saw ample reason to tolerate New Delhi's self-assertive and unilateralist behavior on such issues ranging from trade barriers and climate negotiation to multilateral affairs and international organizations. So that was the position in the 90s and the 2000s. There were American foreign policy makers looking ahead, seeing the rise of China and seeing whether there was a relatively friendly, relatively democratic counterweight within Southeast Asia, or South Asia anyway. And they believed that was to be India. Now, one of the things that you see, and it's not just a Trumpism, but one of the things that you see in the kind of the transitions between presidents is a kind of a reflectiveness on who America has helped, what situations, what economies, what national economies America has helped to kind of cultivate, and whether or not this needs to continue. Have we created a monster? Have we created a problem for ourselves? Nixon looked at West Germany and Japan in the 1970s and said, well, the cars and electronics are pouring into America. They're crowding out our automobile manufacturers and their workers who vote for me in large numbers. Is this desirable? Trump is just a kind of an exaggerated version of that. And one of Trump's first questions is normally a kind of like coded through racism. These sort of people over here, this country of which I know nothing, of which I have no intention of visiting. Why are we giving them all our stuff and help? And there's always a kind of like a long, complicated, and often quite valid strategic and geopolitical answer as to why. Countries are not nice. Big ones, little ones, medium-sized ones. They don't do things for nice reasons. They don't do things for selfless reasons. They do things invariably for reasons of their own benefit, their own strategic calculations. The abolition of US aid this year, or the kind of the severe curtailment of it down to almost nothing, it was again an epic, disastrous own goal by Trump. Though he obviously doesn't not particularly interested in the consequences of what he does, but this was a very, very powerful soft power tool which enabled America to wield considerable influence at a relatively low cost, far cheaper than sending the Pacific Fleet somewhere, in the global South, which ensured useful things like votes at the UN. So Mao Keji continues. Guided by this line of thinking, since the 1990s, the United States, under both Democrat and Republican administrations, had spared no effort in supporting India, even at considerable cost, and has on occasion gone so far as to resolve major difficulties on India's behalf. For example, the George W. Bush administration took the lead as early as 2001 in lifting the international sanctions imposed on India following its 1998 nuclear tests. It then proceeded, at the risk of widespread international criticism, to push through the US-India civil nuclear agreement, lobbying the Nuclear Suppliers Group to grant India a special exemption. As a result, India became a rare exception within the international arms control regime. Despite not being a signatory to the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, it was permitted to retain military nuclear capabilities while freely importing nuclear fuel and technology. Similarly, the Obama administration not only publicly endorsed India's bid for a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council in 2010, but in 2016 also designated India as a major defence partner. This status enabled India to enjoy near alliance-level treatment in the US arms sales and technology transfers, covering almost the full spectrum of advanced mainstream systems, without entering into a formal military alliance with the United States. India has also benefited from Washington's application of double standards in the realm of secondary sanctions. Although the US domestic law mandates secondary sanctions for significant transactions involving Russia or Iran, Washington not only exempted India's participation in the development of Iran's Chabahar port, but the US Congress later passed specific legislation allowing India to deploy Russian-made S-400 air defense systems without triggering US secondary sanctions. By contrast, Turkey, despite facing comparable circumstances, was denied such an exemption. Doesn't sound like the sort of thing that Trump is going to tolerate for a second. And that kind of special status that India has, which Trump probably looks at and says, well, what do we get? Or specifically, what do I get? This is, you're giving away something very valuable here, and there's no quid pro quo. What do we get out of it? Which is kind of typical of the sort of the short-termism of Trump, but also it might suggest that the kind of the largesse that America has lavished on India has perhaps run its course, as these things often do. It hasn't necessarily produced for America the kinds of results that they are looking for. It hasn't done anything to halt the rise of China, and if anything, the status of India at the moment, in the eyes of the Trump administration, is an indicator that, and this is kind of meat and drink to Trumpism, that America has been taken advantage of. Look, we've been too nice. These people, weak Democrats like Biden before me, have bent over backwards for these people, and we get nothing out of it. And I'm speaking to the kind of the American heartland here. We're not going to be taken for mugs any longer. And that's kind of the rhetoric. Mao Keji writes, it is worth noting that the United States has come under mounting pressure in the geopolitical arena. The Biden administration, seeking to counterbalance China more effectively, has moved to bind India more closely to Washington across industry, technology, science, and defense. For example, the Biden administration's initiative on critical and emerging technologies relaxed export controls and restrictions on technology transfers to India, granting it a form of internal access to cutting-edge fields such as artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and nuclear energy. Similarly, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, launched by the Biden administration in 2021, particularly its pillars on fair and resilient trade and supply chain resilience, helped India substitute for Chinese manufacturing capacity through friendshoring.
Hey, Ryan Reynolds here for Mint Mobile. One of the perks about having 4 kids that you know about is actually getting a direct line to the big man up north. Mm-hmm. And this year, he wants you to know the best gift that you can give someone is the gift of Mint Mobile's unlimited wireless for $15 a month. Now, you don't even need to wrap it. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
Today's trivia quiz is on mobile games.
All right, I'm very excited about this one.
I'm going to give you a few hints. Ready?
Ready.
This game has no ads and no need for Wi-Fi to play.
Wait, so does it cost a lot of money?
Nope. It's completely free to play.
What? No way.
It has amazing graphics, and they recently added a bunch of new mini-games.
Hold on. Is that Royal Kingdom?
Yes, bingo. So if you haven't played Royal Kingdom yet, go to the App Store or Google Play and download it for free.
Senior figures within the Biden administration, including the so-called Indo-Pacific Czar, Kurt Campbell, and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, have even argued, after leaving office, for the establishment of a new type of US-India alliance. They have proposed anchoring this relationship on 5 pillars, drawn from areas of pronounced US advantage, namely frontier technologies, industrial economics, military defense, intelligence information, and global coordination. In this vision, the aim to provide more systematic support for India, replacing ISET with the technology for resilient, innovative, and secure trust, or trust initiative, to promote India's frontier technological development, advancing joint arms production and research through the India-US defense acceleration ecosystem, and fostering India's industrial upgrading through bilateral supply chain and investment. So this all seems really, really favourable when it comes to American-India relations up to Trump. And what we'll do is in the second part of this podcast, which I'll probably do tomorrow, we'll look at the reversal and what that's all about. I mean, characteristically, it's about Trump, obviously, but it's also about the changing geostrategic assumptions that America has about China and about Asia. So, to end this part, Mao Keji writes, although the foregoing examples represent only selected episodes from the recent intensification of the US-India engagement, they're nonetheless highly representative. In order to exempt India, the United States was willing to compromise established practices in international nuclear non-proliferation governance, even at the expense of its own international authority. It accepted the stigma of double standards and extended to India forms of preferential treatment beyond the reach of most other countries. It was likewise prepared to commit its own industrial and technological advantages to fostering India's development. All this demonstrates that America's long-standing pursuit of strategic altruism towards India was substantive rather than rhetorical, an approach grounded in concrete policy choices rather than self-serving posturing. Yet this pattern of preferential treatment, long enjoyed by India and increasingly taken for granted, came to an abrupt end when Trump entered the White House for the second time. So I'm going to continue with this tomorrow, and we'll look, I think, the exploration of Asia in 2025 takes a kind of a few episodes to do, and arguably I should have done a few episodes on Europe and America, but there's only so much people are willing to listen to, isn't there? So I'll do this tomorrow, and maybe a third episode looking at perhaps like Taiwan, Japan, and Korea. But this is such an amazing document, and I'll put a link to it below. It's well worth a read. And I hope that it's kind of enlightening to you and useful. Anyway, as I've been mentioning on various episodes recently, we'll be in the beginning of January. We'll be going live with tickets for the events we're going to run for students. Today on Sunday, this is the last kind of general kind of podcast day we're going to, or exclusively general podcast day we're going to do. Sundays is study day. Might be able to do a few more non-study focused ones as well, but we'll see. We're all got our limits, haven't we? Anyway, I'll catch you on the next Explaining History podcast. Take good care, everyone. All the best. Bye-bye.
Fidelity. What's it cost to invest with the Fidelity app?
Start with as little as $1 with no account fees or trade commissions on U.S. stocks and ETFs.
That's music to my ears.
I can only talk.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Zero account fees apply to retail brokerage accounts only. Sell order assessment fee not included. A limited number of ETFs are subject to a transaction-based service fee of $100. See full list at fidelity.com/commissions. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE SIPC.
For delicious meals, you could go out to eat, or you could just make a Marie Callender's meal. Marie Callender's classic chicken parmigiana bowl is so good. It has marinara sauce that's made from scratch and creamy mozzarella cheese over pasta. It's delicious with no artificial flavors, colors, or preservatives, and 30 grams of protein. You can find it in the frozen aisle. Marie Callender's, what having it all tastes like.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.